Hello dear inspired beings. Welcome to this first video lesson with me in front of the camera. It is my honor, it is my pleasure. And today we will go deeper inside some of the topics that we covered in the last mega transmission. It was really and truly wider transmission that lasted almost 5 hours. And inside it we covered a lot of dynamics, topics and movement of energy and principles. So today we'll go inside some of the topics and just to remember a little bit what happened in the transmission. The transmission started with the narrative, the internal narrative, and in it we started to distinguish what is an internal narrative where our thoughts and scenarios and imagination are fragmented, and what is an internal narrative where our contents seems to have a flow and so the narrative becomes musical. So let's write it. Musical narrative, where our internal dialogue is connected to the second element, that is our purposes, and we call it them, so purposes, we call it them the natural purposes. Natural purposes, where when you have these two together, suddenly inside your narrative, the narrative becomes active, and in it you are remembering that you are creating, and we call it the I am creating. So let's write it here. I am creating. That is the awareness that you have when you act, when you are present in your internal narrative. You have this type of awareness. So it's not negative self-talk or negative internal narrative where you are wondering, worrying, judging yourself, doubting, projecting negative scenarios and so on. But it is a more conscious narrative, I would say a more present narrative, because in the negative narrative you have these thoughts, okay, that you are not aware of them totally, from how it is the modality of the narrative. It is just this thought that you have. You don't see its musicality, for example. You know it's negative, but when you are aware of this, you can switch and go immediately in a different narrative where the negative self-talk doesn't even exist anymore. And this is made possible. It is possible thanks to this connection. But to make this connection between the natural purposes, for example, the natural purposes of creating, loving, being, you need this element that is intention. And we called it active intention, and we called it in the last transmission our real intention. So let's call them in these ways. Intention or real intentions. And so intention was really the topic that we went deep inside the transmission, and we started to see that intention is bringing a natural purposes present in our internal narrative. So it's like happens, sorry, it's this way. And then the circle is closed because in the musical internal narrative you have your natural purposes represented. So there is no separation between it. And inside the transmission, we call it this musical narrative that is the representation of the natural purposes, the new context that is created. So what it does really, the intention, the real intention, what are they doing? They are feeling these things that are contents, they are feelings. The real intention is aware of the contents that are inside the sensory and feeling contents that are inside the natural purposes, and the real intention is moving, bringing them into the musical narrative and in our reality. So let's see this movement in another way. So we have two elements. One is context and one is content. So we have content and we have context. Okay? So I will make a very clear example of what it means to have an intention that brings the contents into the context, if you want. So when we have the intention to do something, for example, you have an idea, okay? And you start to think about this idea, you start to imagine this idea. But when it's time to act, to take action, maybe there could be the tendency of not to knowing where to start, not having motivation to do it, seeing it as difficult, for example, or trying too much. So it's like having effort in bringing it, this content, this idea, into the action. And this has a real motivation for it. And today we will cover why this is happening and how to overcome it in a very, very simple way. So, contents, we say an idea, okay? And the contents are usually represented by current circumstances, so the reality situations. Okay, let's write them. Reality situations. Okay. So we have the intention is in between the two things. So why we are having this idea? When we start to understand why we are having, it means that we are starting to see it through the lens of purposes. What is the purpose of having this idea and this content? So you suddenly also ask to yourself, is this content representing the truth? It is a content of truth, or it is something that I'm programmed to do? It is something that I feel true, and if I feel it true, it means that is representing, it is a content of one of my real purposes. So for example, in my video of today, the real purpose is sharing also the joy of this awareness, this understanding, this principle. So I am in the real purpose of service, of contributing, of sharing an idea. And while I do it, I remember it. So the content, the idea that I had is representing, that is also in connection with the real purposes that I have. This is the first thing to do. Understand what type of content you are having. So if you understand what type of content you have, you understand also the purpose. So let's write also purpose. Oh, it's finishing. Let's see if this one can work, can still work. Yes. So I'm registering this video in the weekend. The shops for these are not open, so I will have the new ones soon. So let's write it also type of content. Type of content. Purpose. Intention. So we said that intention is a movement. Okay? Let's write it. And now we will see what this movement of intention is doing. So here in what I will say now, there is the answer in why sometimes bringing the contents, the idea into the context seems difficult. And this is why, this is because often the contexts are seen as separate from the content. So the intention is something that is unifying the two things. And the intention is a movement of what? Is a movement that is starting to imprint the contents into the context. In other words, in simple words, your idea, it doesn't stay anymore only in the back of your mind, in the back of perception, but you start to see, feel, and perceive it also in the context of reality. You start to feel present, this idea, this content here. Because it is. The illusion of separation was perceiving the content as separate, as not present into the context. So this movement is a movement of imprinting, we can say. Okay? Movement of imprinting. So in my intention, I start to feel the content present into the context. And so these situations and so on start to change also. Because let's take an idea. Let's take the example of this video so it is easy to understand. So I have the idea to do this video lesson, for example, and at the beginning I feel it in the back of the perception, and I feel it as a content, okay, a possibility also, a potential. So I remember the purpose of contributing, serving, loving, expressing joy through it, and so the intention, the purpose also are connected, as it is always. And so I start to feel the content into the context. But this means ultimately that my perception of the context is changing. And I don't have anymore, for example, the perception of my context as difficult, as not welcoming the idea, but I feel changing octave, changing vibration. I start to be in a different context, where this idea, this seed, for example, I will also say that is a seed. So the seed, I feel this seed in the context where it is blossoming. Okay? Or you can say also blossoming here. Blossoming. Okay? So the intention has the main role of making our contents visible in the context. So without intention, you start to perceive the contents, but then you have a wall of the context. Say, oh no, it's not possible to imprint, to move this idea. While the intention is bringing you, focusing you, and letting you perceive a different type of context. So, in the transmission, the last transmission, we also said that instead, unconscious intention, they are dependent on our externalized perception of the context. So, for example, if we perceive the context as something difficult, resistant, for example, something that is not letting us to bloom, to blossoming, the unconscious intention is trying to change the context, but it doesn't work so much. It's like the unconscious intention is instead of having a movement of imprinting that is based on faith, trust, and love, it is a movement of pushing. So, this seed that is imprinted here, in all of these phases, it is conserving the faith. Okay? So, you can say also faith is another element that is present. So, we said before, intention are real intentions. So, for example, if I have the real intention to love, my perception of the context are context of love, where I can express love. Feel it for a moment now. Let it be in you. You remember your natural purposes. You feel contents of truth that are connected to the purposes, and you imprint them into the context. So the context are fulfilling the entire circle, and the contents are just a representation of the natural purposes. And so it comes back what we said before here, that the natural purposes are represented in the musical narrative. So the narrative that stands, can say it is connected to the context, sorry. Yes, because ultimately there is no separation. What we are telling, the narrative, the dialogue, what we are telling to ourselves becomes the way in which we see the context. So, if we are telling to ourselves something through intention, it is a conscious narrative. is not anymore a program that is talking in automatic. And we are telling to ourselves that we are creating. I am creating is an expression. In one phrase, there is an expression of both a purpose, natural purpose, and an active intention. So you see this real deep connection between purposes and real intention. While in unconscious intention, you're maybe not remembering this one, and you are trying through a fragmented, more chaotic narrative to change the context, instead of seeing that the context are natural playgrounds of the natural purposes. Okay? I guess with this we have covered with simplicity the lesson. So also want you to see again this slide so you can remember. So it's time to blossom. It's time to perceive our context in the perception, in the game, and so on, the dynamic of being something where contents, intentions, and purposes can blossom. Okay? So the contexts are not anymore enemies. Remember that. Because the unconscious intention was left in a state of memorization or awareness where they were perceiving the context as enemies. So instead, the real intention are feeling the context as something that is part of the process, and is something that where contents and context are communicating, interrelating to each other, and so there is not anymore the separation. So thank you for this, for having watched this lesson. It is my joy to bring these ideas and principles also visually, so it is more understandable in a new way what we cover in the transmission. Thank you so much, and see you soon. I also add a last thing, a PS, in this video. So this one are contents of truth, okay? While instead, when you have unconscious intention, what are these contents? Are the contents of belief. And so maybe you have an idea, but together with this idea you have also associated some contents of limiting beliefs. And for example, one of the limiting beliefs that are associated with this idea are that contexts are enemies. Okay? So, or for example, it can be also other type of belief about your expression, for example. So, in this regard, we will go deeper in another lesson and transmission. But I wanted to just to clarify also what types of content one can have So to distinguish between the contents of truth and the contents of belief, because then belief that you see in a different way this natural unfolding that we have. Okay, thank you. Also, thank you for listening to this little add-on to the video lesson. See you soon.